Welcome to the new school. I'm Brian McGrath. I'm the Dean of the School of Constructed Environments, which has 500 students in 8 degree programs in architecture, interior design, lighting design, product, and industrial design. But we're just a small part of a 5,000 Parsons School of Design, which is part of a 10,000 student university based in social research. So we're the place to come to for design and social research. So it's very appropriate that we should host this. I'm here hosting this event because in my 7 years of architectural education, which if you do the math, 14 design studios, I had one woman architect as a design critic. And her name was Susanna Torre. And last year, we had the occasion to inaugurate feminism and architecture as an intergenerational conversation, because what I found was that the knowledge of her generation of feminists and architects was lost in the students that I was teaching here at Parsons. And so at that conference, many people who came there decided we needed to continue this discussion. Peggy was the one who put her time and effort and ideas forward first to frame this discussion over the next 2 days of women architecture and academia. So I think I really want to acknowledge again Susanna's foundational work in this area, and for Peggy and I from a next generation, but it's also really great that this intergenerational discussion is continuing with even students presenting in the next 2 days. When I graduated from my master's in architecture school, the last of these 14 design critics, as a kind of parting message, said, "You know, Brian, architecture is a gentleman's profession." And I know it was a crack at my kind of class, and maybe a first-generation university student didn't belong at Princeton, but somehow it made me recognize the difficulties of half of my classmates who happened to be women, including Debbie. Did she run out for lunch? So I want to acknowledge Deborah Gans, because I think the two of us were part of a generation that didn't believe that parting message, and tried to practice in a very ungentlemanly way. We're also here because in 1991, Debbie, you just missed the acknowledgement of our generation. Sorry, I'll say it again tomorrow. So we're also here because in 1991, Susanna was the first chair of the architecture department here at Parsons. And she invited Peggy Deemer and myself to develop and teach sequential courses in a new curriculum. Peggy in Theory of Architectural Form, and I taught Theory of Urban Form, and that began a 25-year friendship, which I think I'm looking forward to the next 25 years, somewhere near Australia and Southeast Asia. Ms. Deemer is a principal in the firm Deemer Architects. Projects by her and her former firm, Deemer & Phillips, have been featured in various publications, as you all know, including Architecture, Architecture Record, Vogue, New York Times, and articles by Peggy have appeared in Assemblage, Praxis, Perspecta, Harvard Design Magazine, Log, and other journals and anthologies. She is the editor of Architecture and Capitalism, 1845 to the present, and the Millennium House, and the co-editor of Rereading Perspecta and Building in the Future, Building in the Future, Recasting Labor and Architecture. And BIM in Academia is the last of those books. Her theory work analyzes the relationship among architectural labor, craft, and subjectivity. So it's with great pleasure that I turn over the podium to Peggy Deemer.
I thank you for that introduction, and I don't think I deserve a special introduction. I think this is really about the group of us, and I am so unbelievably excited to see all of you here. I think it's just fabulous, and so this is for all of us. I do have to thank Brian. It's been fabulous co-organizing this with him, and when one of us falls off, the other one steps in, and it's just been a fabulous collaboration. But I also have to acknowledge that it really was Brian who, after the first of these feminism and architecture panels, emailed and said that let's get on with this. You know, he was not going to let this drop, and so you deserve a lot of credit for making this happen. I really appreciate it. I'm really just up here to describe how this is going to work for today and tomorrow. It might be obvious, particularly for those of you who are presenting, but let me just go through this. The thrust of this, I mean, the body of this are 3 different sessions that deal with 3 different themes: representation, gender, family, and politics, and curriculum. And each of those has 7 presenters who are going to be presenting their work in a Pechakucha style, which means that they have to keep up with the timing of the slides, which means that we can't have any lingering long talks, no matter how much we want to linger over that information. But in addition to that, we are going to have introductory remarks today by Karen van Lengen, and then the keynote speaker with Katja Grillner this evening. And then tomorrow, again, we'll begin the day with Donna Robertson and end the day with Debbie Gans. So they will bracket the 3 different sessions, one of which is today, 2 of which are tomorrow. I want to say thank you for coming on a weekend that I know is not ideal for anybody. Passover, Good Friday, Easter weekend, you know, this I know is a sacrifice for many of you, and I really appreciate that you've made the huge effort to make this work. The theme of this second one, obviously, is women, architecture, and academia. We suspect that the third one is going to be women, architecture, and the profession. But in some way, you can't separate these as neatly as we might want. And I think we're going to be seeing the value of, or the connection between academia for setting up the profession, but also how the profession eventually circumscribes what we do in academia. And I think there's a vital connection. But nevertheless, and I think one of the insights that Brian had was that in order to get this going, make this thematically clear, which is to say academia. And I think there's a lot that all of us who either teach or are students that operate within this institution have a lot to contribute around that. One word about the workshops. The presentations are a prelude to workshops in each case. The workshops are supposed to be a real working session such that we can bring real positive suggestions to our institutions around these 3 different themes. So not all of you will probably be interested in the workshops of all of those sessions, and so you're not expected to have to attend. Stay if you really want to be a part of that conversation. Otherwise, go out and network with your colleagues. But what it precludes is a real question-answer session. The workshops will go immediately into constructive suggestions where questions will have to be subsumed into I think we can and I think we should. So that's basically it about the formats here. I'll just say one thing. This the schedule that you see here has been slightly adjusted so that each session is 2 hours. There was kind of a hiccup here when we did this, but basically the session today is 1:30 to 3:30, and then we will have a half-hour break before the 4 o'clock keynote, although there's been a request that if we don't need that full half-hour break, that we move that up so the people who need to respond to Passover conditions can go, but we'll play that by ear. But anyway, don't pay attention to the 1:30 to 3. It's 1:30 to 3:30, and again tomorrow, starting at 10, that will go from 10 till 12, not 12:30. That, again, will be a 2-hour session. We'll have a long break between that session and lunch such that we can talk. I think that many of us will actually be trying to figure out how we bring this into the future and how we codify this for our institutions. So there'll be a long break, and then the last session will go from 1:30 till 3:30, and then we'll have a break. So anyway, that's the modified schedule. But let me just then thank you again and tell you how totally pleased I am that all of you are here. Our moderators have been fabulous. They've done a lot of work. I want to thank them in particular. I think this is going to run smoothly, I think, because our moderators have really done a lot of organizational work. I won't be introducing them when it's time for them to come up. They should introduce themselves. This has to do with expediency and what your own memories can hold, but they're a large part of the success of this. But anyway, Brian, if you want to come.
Well, in continuing the historical narrative of this School of Architecture that I'm now the dean of. When Susanna left as chair of architecture in 1995, we had an interim director, Sharon Haar, who I'm very happy could be here today, and she was just holding the torch waiting for Karen Van Langen to come, and she was chair from 1995 to 1999, I believe. So Karen Van Langen is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, an internationally renowned architect and educator. She's the William Kennan Professor of Architecture at the University of Virginia. Karen's research focuses on the exploration of sound and communication as an integral part of the new public realm and its evolving democratic culture. I think you picked up some things of the New School ethos while you were here. We're a school of performing arts and social research and design. As I mentioned, from 1995 to 1999, she was chair of the architecture at Parsons. She founded the renowned design workshop here, which continues. We have continued and built on that foundation, and the associated curriculum that celebrates the theory to building process that remains a hallmark of the program today. And one of our instructors from that program, Stephanie Kramer, will be speaking tomorrow. So that's, again, the intergenerational discussion we started last year is something that I continue to be awed by, the sort of continuity of some of the passions around these issues. But for 10 years, 1999 to 2009, Karen led the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia as dean, where she championed cross-disciplinary education and research to address the complex environmental and cultural challenges that she dubbed the architecture of urgent matter. I mean, beautiful title. She's a graduate of Vassar College and MArch of Columbia University, worked at IMPay, where she was the first female design associate before founding her own firm here in New York City in 1987. Please welcome Karen Van Langen.
Thank you, Brian. It's really a pleasure to be back here. It's been a while. And so I'm thrilled and for the opportunity. Oops, I have these glasses. I don't need both. Let me just put this in order. Right with you. Okay, I hope my pages are in order, but you'll forgive me if they aren't. So it is a real honor and pleasure to be here again at Parsons after really such a long time. And thank you to Peggy, Brian, and Iona, who I haven't met yet, for this enormous opportunity and for organizing the conference on such a very important topic. I too pay tribute to Susanna Torre, who gave an insightful presentation last year in the first part of the program sponsored by the League. She set an historical framework for this conference and for the work that we hope to accomplish here. She, as Brian mentioned, was my predecessor as chair of architecture at Parsons many years ago, and so I inherited Brian and Peggy and Sharon and Susanna's excellent work in in developing curricula and programs that were really well designed, which gave me an excellent foundation for the work that our leadership group accomplished in the following years. So thank you to all of you. It was really, it was a very exciting time. In this introduction, I would like to give a brief overview of where women are today in various places, because I think there has been huge progress made since the time when I began in architecture, and I think we need to really understand that in order to understand where we're going. So I'm going to discuss both some figures that will be interesting to you, I think, and then briefly discuss the continuing challenges that have been outlined by the conference brief. So I begin with what is a rather disturbing image. This beautiful Botticelli Venus imprinted on the sole of this very expensive Botticelli shoe. I took this photograph a couple of weeks ago on my way to MoMA on 53rd Street, and it's haunted me ever since. Who would dare to put this image in this format? Perhaps someone thought it was a clever idea, but really, Mr. Gentleman, as he walks confidently down the street in his expensive shoes, he pulverizes our Venus over and over until she's finally gone, wiped out, forgotten. I don't want to be too dramatic here, but the contrast between the dreamy Venus and her intended destiny is worth considering as we open the conference today. To frame our discussion, I'd like to look at a few statistics. If we look at the women in the workforce from 1970 to 2010, what we can see is women have made huge strides, and we are almost at a place where women and men have equal representation. And what we can see in this particular chart, and if you look towards the bottom, you will see that physicians and surgeons, pharmacists, lawyers and judges, and a huge increase in civil engineers, even though they still make up only 12%. These are big changes that have occurred in this 45-year period, huge changes. I will also say that with those increases in numbers have not come equity in salary. If you take the physicians and surgeons alone, it is a fact that 75% of the women make 75% of what the men make. So there has a lot of work to be done in that area as well as others. But in this chart that I have designed by Leanne Chang, who was very helpful to me in putting together some of these information slides from the ACSA, this is a really interesting outline. If you look at the top, it starts with the AIA gold medalists, of which we have about 3% of the profession. And then you go all the way to the left, and you see that women make up more than 50% of the population. So this rise through these heavy steps, and of course at the top she's, rock climbing to get up there. But if you go through some of these, and maybe some of the more interesting ones are in these slides, that we have basically 50-50 architecture students. They graduate at equal rates. And fewer than 1 in 5 deans is a woman. And if we look at guest lecturers, particularly for those students, we see that only 1 in 4 guest lecturers are women. And an even larger offset is that we find that only 3 in 20 people, our licensed AIA members, are women. Well, that's not very much, and it's not commensurate with what's happened in law or in medicine. So there's been an enormous progress, but there is certainly work to be done. And in this particular image, I really want to highlight the fact that if you look at all of these towards the end in the 1980s, we see how few women actually have been premiated by AIA gold medals or the Topaz Medal or the Pritzker Prize. Very few. And the first woman, and now I've lost my notes here, the first woman was actually Blanche Lemko Van Ginkel of University of Toronto. She was a structural engineer and a design teacher. So she's that one little red spot on the 1980s. So For those women who are young, I think it's really hard to imagine the days when there were no women to look at, and I had the same experience of Brian as going to Columbia. So it is beginning to increase, and I think that's a positive, very positive trend. Looking at this pipeline into the profession, there are also some interesting relationships. If you see how many women have increased in the NCARB record applicants, meaning they will be taking their exam, they will be going on to become architects, and the gap between those people taking that exam, intending to be architects, and then actually practicing, it's huge. So I think somewhere in that territory, we need to get at why that happens in that way and why they drop off in that particular piece. And then, of course, you see, again, the award winners, and you see the students, which are really increasing in numbers to have 50-50 representation. And then gender and salary. In this slide, what you can see are that they basically start out together. And I think this is an interesting image for those people dealing with family and gender, because it's really it begins to slide off right in the mid-30s, where women, presumably, if they are having families, will be having them, and then it drops significantly after 50. They've just had enough, they leave the profession, and they call it the missing 10% at the end. They just leave. So there is good news at the beginning, but then we have to think about what happens in that time, mid-career to end of career. Another, let's see, where am I? In the area of academia, too, I want to move a little bit from the profession to academia. And as Peggy pointed out, you really cannot separate these, because many of us practice and teach, and there's not a strict division between these. So there's a fluidity to it. But this was a shocking statistic to me, that in John Curtis at the American Association of University Professors, in 2010, offered this surprising statistic that in 1971, women faculty salaries were 81% of male faculty salaries. And in 2010, that statistic was exactly the same. He does point out, of course, that there are many factors that influence these percentages, and this is a very general percentage. And one is where women teach and what kinds of institutions they teach in. So one has to pick this apart to get the real picture. Something that may be a little more accurate is that we at UVA just finished a salary equity report. And what we found is that the average female salary at UVA is 2.7% lower than the males overall, and that's a difference of $3,638. So it's not as dramatic as the previous slide, but it's still there. And what we found is that these are the tenured and tenure track faculty totals on top. But if you look at the professors and the associate professors, the biggest area of inequity occurs in the associate professor level. So they would be people probably in their 40s and 50s. And then the full professors also, there's some inequity. But the interesting part here is that the assistant professors are now coming in above their male counterparts. So I think that's progress in the academic realm. I mean, I think that's good news. I don't know that it will stay that way, but it's certainly a flip to the other side, and there's been enormous, and the reason that has happened is there's been enormous push by the women in the university, not only at UVA, but in other institutions, to make that possible. So these things do not happen automatically. So I want to now move forward and talk just a little bit about the themes. That the statistics that I just told, they tell us, in fact, that we have made great strides in the inclusion of women in the profession and in academia. We aren't equal, but the thrust of our inclusion in the profession and the academy is quite impressive, and salary equity is improving, as we just saw. I do want to say on a personal note, and backing up what Brian had said, I can tell you that I graduated from Columbia in the late 70s, and that during my 3 years as an MArch student, I had one female lecturer, Ada Carmi. And I then joined the IMP firm of 200 people, and I was one of 4 female architects. So it is a very different day today, and the work done to change those numbers is worth celebrating, and also commemorating the many women who pushed through that time, not always with ease, but with the hope of transformation, which I do think has been happening. So today we turn our attention to the new work ahead. We may not be so concerned with quantity, but with the quality of women's experiences and contributions. These are issues that are more subtle and harder to excavate. A recent example is a case in point. I don't know how many of you followed this story of Ellen Peo and her gender lawsuit in the male-dominated venture capitalist firm of Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers. But last week, after suing for gender bias in the workplace, she lost the suit. This field of venture capitalism has only 6% women, and it's down from 10% in 1999. This was a highly visible case because she was suing for reasons that are not easy to prove. As an example, her lawyer brought forth some of her annual reviews, which included comments on her aggressive behavior and other reviews on her quiet and receding behavior, which were detrimental to her success in the firm. So this straddling of the thin blue line is often characteristic of a world that demands women to negotiate it very, very carefully. Though Peo did not win the suit, the case has raised national awareness of the issue, how perception, presentation, personality all seem deeply influential in the advancement of women, especially when they are judged mostly by men. Even more striking in this image, at the bottom of the New York Times breaking news article, are the following articles. And if you look at them, we have the Wi-Fi Barbie doll with the soul of Siri. That's good. And then we have Silicon Valley, here, where this is coming from. Auto racing becomes the new favorite hobby for the tech elites. So I guess if you want to join one of those firms, you have to do auto racing now. But networks have been present in male circles forever, from male clubs to fraternities to sports teams. This quality of creating opportunities and supporting one another's initiatives has been the leitmotif for male advancement. It has been my observation that women have not developed these networks as effectively, and this might be a good time to refocus our efforts in this direction. Susanna Torrey, in her recent talk, explained how tokenism of women had marked the beginnings of the women's movement in architecture, and that also tended to put women in competition with one another. And I think we are moving past the tokenism situation, as the statistics suggest, and we might want to think about strengthening our networks and consciously supporting one another, even in the face of a very competitive landscape. There are many ways to develop these networks, both formal and informal, and I share just one of them with you today. In 2006, I founded a program at UVA called Women's Work. It was designed to not only celebrate the research and design work of women on the faculty, but to also begin to create a wider network that might spawn unusual opportunities and alliances among women colleagues. The group met once a month for a research lecture and lunch by a female faculty member, followed by a discussion among the participants. This program was very successful, and when I completed my deanship, I went on a one-year sabbatical, and the provost's office took over the program, and it has been a very vibrant one ever since. Through this process, I not only met a number of highly accomplished women working in diverse fields, but I also found interesting opportunities as well, and some very good friends. So I believe the network part of this conference is really important and could be strategic in leaving with some very clear ideas about how to do that. Curricula. A very substantive and foundational aspect of this conference will be focused on the development of curricula, and naturally the technology themes will be front and center. So I bring to your attention a not so uncommon situation. Here's a blog. This is taken from a blog commentary from Arc Daily that covered the New Normal conference at Penn last year. So, and I don't mean to pick on Penn, but this is kind of amazing, the new normal. Digital tools have fundamentally altered the way in which we conceptualize, design, and fabricate architecture. Participants were asked not only to reflect upon the past, recent past, but also to speculate on future possibilities. And the blog writer goes on to say, one notable absence from the slate of participants in the symposium was a critic or historian to situate the new normal within both the history of architectural practice and the wider milieu of contemporary culture. Also lacking were the voices of women who numbered only 3 out of 20 speakers and moderators. And unfortunately, I don't have an image of the guys that were all there, but that's billed as the new normal. So. And finally, and lastly, family. This is a citation from a Women in Architecture article in Architect's Journal. When women were asked, do you have difficulties resuming your career after having children? Some did, some didn't. But the astounding part here is that almost all of them said, the female architects, that having children put them at an advantage, and that it did not put the males at an advantage. And I think that's something to really consider, how we begin to frame that differently. I suspect that the response might be similar, this is in the profession, also in academia as well. In fact, at UVA, as probably in many other institutions, pregnancy is considered a disability and referred to in conversations that revolve around maternity leaves. So again, I hope in the context of this conference we can begin to think of very specific ways that we can celebrate the architectures of family environments as well as the built environment. And I now end with Barbie, because this is a kind of amazing, I could have spent the whole time on this particular image because it's so loaded, but as I might have done, I end with Barbie the architect. I might have spent the whole time on this, but suffice it to say that Mattel introduced Barbie the architect into their Young Professional Doll series a few years ago. They have Barbie doctors, Barbie vets, Barbie lawyers, each with a characteristic outfit. In the case of architect Barbie, well, it's true that she's no longer wearing the debutante gown or the bathing suit, but the outfit alone gives us pause. I guess we could give them kudos for the boots and the black Korb glasses, but Mattel is in the business of selling more dolls, and presumably they thought that the girls with those pink dolls might also want to have a professional life someday, so they entered into this new line. I checked on their website this week, and I found that Barbie the architect was discontinued. I guess it just didn't sell. So that's one part of the story. The second part of the story is even closer to home, because here we see that the AIA sponsored a Barbie house competition. And it was won by 2 GSD students who claimed that they had played with the original Barbies as kids. They were thrilled to enter the competition and even happier to have won. Here is a description of the house that you see on the right. The winning house design features entertaining space and a chef's open kitchen on the first floor, along with an office, a library, and a meeting space. There's a terrace on the second floor, and the third and fourth floors are Barbie's doll private enclave, her bedroom and her inspiration room, respectively. The roof has a greenhouse, a landscape garden for her domestic pets. The design elements include solar panels, landscape rooftop, and an irrigation system, operable shading devices, bamboo flooring, low-flow toilets and sink fixtures, and locally sourced and manufactured materials and furnishings. My, what a politically correct house this is. And Barbie doesn't even need to leave her home to work. Her office is there, her inspiration room is upstairs, and she can be inspired by the pinkness of this scheme. Of course, and then of course she has her entertaining space, but of course she's so thin, I don't think she eats anyway, so this grand space is presumably to entertain other people. But what about boyfriend Ken? There you see him in the background, lurking there in the background. Is this his dream house too? Or the better question is why the AIA didn't sponsor a Ken doll competition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Should I leave Barbie up for a little while? I also want to give a little plug. Karen and her partner have a piece up at the Museum of the City of New York through June on the sound research that she talked about earlier. I'd also wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge the Yale Equity and Design group, and it's interesting what schools of architecture support versus what universities support, and your narrative about the provost's office and women's work is interesting, because this is funded by the Department of the Provost Department for Diversity at Yale, not the School of Architecture, and the Yale Equity and Design group has given support for this. I also want to acknowledge Joy, are you here? Andrew, Reem, and Howard from our office for really making this possible. And lastly, even though we're finishing before sundown in respect for Seder's and all the holidays Peggy talked about, I did feel I wanted to show you our studios and our offices and our gallery and invite you over for a drink. So anyone who'd like to, there's a map that you can come and have a drink with us over just down one block east of here at 25 East 13th Street. So Peggy?